evolution, all those types of stuff. So I'm going to turn it over to Don Deal. God bless you.
Hi, I'm Don Deal. I'm the Director of Research and Development for Norm Geisler International Ministries. Welcome to the 5th day of the 3rd International Apologetics Marathon here at the ABNSAT's Trinity channel. Tonight we're going to be discussing on the topic of science and faith. We're going to be discussing Darwinism or evolution, myth or reality, and specifically we call this doubts on Darwinism. Why? Well, it's not just a simple matter of Christians or religious people don't necessarily believe Darwinism or something of that sort, and therefore people who aren't religious do believe in Darwinism or evolution. It goes both ways. The atheistic philosopher, a self-professed atheist philosopher, Thomas Nagel, when he discussed Darwinian evolution theory, he said, "I would be willing to bet that the present right-thinking consensus will come to seem laughable in a generation or two." There's an atheist who's talking about the problems with the theory of evolution, the neo-Darwinian paradigm as they call it now. However, on the flip side, another atheist, Richard Dawkins, said, "It is absolutely safe to say that if you meet somebody who claims not to believe in evolution, that person is ignorant, stupid, or insane, or wicked, but I'd rather not consider that." Now think about those two different viewpoints, both from atheists, one saying evolution doesn't work and doesn't explain life, and the other saying you're insane if you don't believe it. Well, tonight we're going to be discussing that and topics such as what is evolution? What is Darwinism? What is intelligent design? Is it a science? These are the kind of questions we're going to be talking about tonight on doubts in Darwinism. Joining us from Southern Evangelical Seminary will be Dr. J.T. Bridges. He's the academic dean and assistant professor of philosophy at Southern Evangelical Seminary. His academic research interests include the philosophical theology of Thomas Aquinas, the philosophy of science, and important issues subsumed under the philosophy of religion. His PhD dissertation, I'm going to read you the exact title so that later on we can try to figure out what he's talking about. His PhD dissertation was titled, "An Analysis of the Neo-Darwinian Intelligent Design Debate Based on an Eclectic Philosophy of Science Grounded in Thomistic Realism." J.T. Bridges, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Don.
And you think at some point in this show, during the next 90 minutes, we'll have time just to figure out what your title of your dissertation means?
Yeah, we might be able to go through the title.
Okay, that'll be pretty aggressive scheduling to get through that title. Our second guest joining us from England tonight is Jonathan McLatchie. He holds an honors degree in forensic biology, a master's degree in evolutionary biology, and a second master's degree in medical and molecular bioscience, and currently he's a PhD student in cell biology. I believe representing the intelligent design side tonight will be Jonathan McLatchie. Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Hey, good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, for people who are watching, if you want to call in and ask either of these scholars a question, you can see the numbers at the bottom of the screen. For people in the U.S., it's 248-416-1300. If you want to ask a question or perhaps call these guys out on something they're saying. JT, what was your PhD research about?
Well, my PhD research was looking at the neo-Darwinian intelligent design debate from the perspective of the philosophy of science, and not just the philosophy of science, but a specific view of the philosophy of science grounded in Thomistic realism. St. Thomas Aquinas's particular brand of epistemology, his theory of knowledge, and as it relates to the history and philosophy of science, and the resources from the history and philosophy of science brought to bear on the neo-Darwinism intelligent design debate.
Just so our viewers who may not be familiar with terminology, most viewers have heard of evolution, and we'll get into some of the controversy just on what that means. But when JT, when you say neo-Darwinism, what do you mean?
Well, I mean the brand of orthodox Darwinism that has been around since about the 1940s.
Okay, so Jonathan, could you explain what neo-Darwinism is?
Neo-Darwinism is fairly loosely defined. There's a number of different ways the term is used in the literature. Yes, it can refer to the classical neo-Darwinian synthesis involving random genetic mutation, natural selection, and genetic drift and the like. And it can also encompass the neo-extended synthesis, if you will, which is developed over the last several years, which encompasses other mechanisms, including evolutionary developmental biology and things of that nature. And neo-Darwinism, in a more broader sense, can refer to the proposition that life is fully explicable by a non-directed, stochastic, mindless mechanism of chance and necessity. So there's a number of different ways in which the term can be used.
So it's basically the Darwinian theory melded or blended with modern discoveries in genetics and such.
Right.
Okay. JT, when you got your PhD, just to make sure everyone understands if you're qualified, who exactly was on your examining board for your PhD?
Well, the director of my dissertation was was Dr. Richard Howe, who was the director of the PhD program here at the time. But my readers, my committee of readers were Oxford mathematician John Lennox and senior Discovery Institute fellows Jay Richards and William Dembski.
So you probably are qualified for that then.
Well, at least I'm not unqualified. So
I'll go with that qualification. Jonathan, tell us a little bit about your PhD research. What exactly are you researching?
Well, my current research is on mitotic cell division in a cancer cell line. I study the molecular basis of the transition between what's called metaphase and anaphase, which occurs in cell division, where basically in order to progress from one stage to the other, you have to degrade proteins, and I'm studying one of the an enzyme complex which is involved in tagging proteins for destruction.
And we don't already know about this?
Well, there's much to learn.
Yeah, I'm sure, and everything in biology. The only reason I say that, I say it jokingly, but of course, there are some people who try to make it sound as though we've already figured everything out in biology, and therefore anyone who questions it is doing so from a religious bias. I'll ask this. I've seen the term, and we are discussing basically evolution tonight. I've seen the term evolution used in more than 20 different ways, it seems to me. What is evolution? And I'll start with you, Jonathan.
What is evolution? Well, it can refer to simply changes in allele frequencies over time, which is not controversial. Everyone acknowledges and agrees that allele frequencies, and by allele I mean gene variant. And we know that life has changed over time. There are organisms alive today which were not alive in the past. There are organisms that were alive in the past that are not alive today. So life evolves in that sense. It can also refer to the process of speciation, where species become separated by different barriers, such as geography, perhaps, and give rise to new species as a result of genetic variation and selection. It can refer to the grander claim of common ancestry, which is to say that modern organisms are connected by a common ancestor, a common progenitor, which gave rise to different lines. Or it can refer to the even grander claim of universal common ancestry, the idea that all organisms are descended from a single common ancestor that lived more than 3 billion years ago. Or it can refer to the proposition of neo-Darwinism, the idea that life is the result of an unguided, mindless mechanism, and that that natural selection and genetic mutation and other similarly unguided processes can in fact serve as a designer substitute. So that's how I would define the different ways that evolution is used.
JT, during your research, did you have any difficulty determining from book to book, paper to paper, exactly how the writer was using the term evolution? Do they use it consistently?
Yeah, I would say that that my research is probably a little bit less technical scientifically than Jonathan's, and so within the scope of the fairly comprehensive range of definitions that Jonathan gave, I think the writers are fairly consistent in the way they're, because I mean, evolutionary theory does encompass many different facets, and it would be uncharitable to evolutionary theorists to say that that evolution can only focus in on one facet of theory that's fairly broad.
I've seen the term evolution. I've seen proponents of evolution, scientists or public figures or newscasters refer to evolution as a fact. Jonathan, would you agree evolution is a fact in a general sense?
Well, again, it depends what we mean. If we mean simply the allele frequencies change in a population over time, by virtue of genetic drift and other mechanisms, natural selection, genetic mutation, yeah, that's a fact. We observe it. We observe that we observe antibiotic resistance, insecticide resistance, and various other adaptations. So evolution, in that sense, is a fact. But can that process be justifiably extrapolated to explain the diversity and complexity of life on Earth? I think not.
So are you saying something along the lines of macroevolution yes, or microevolution yes, macroevolution no, something along that line?
I'm not such a fan of the dichotomy between micro and macroevolution, because I think it suggests falsely that macroevolution is just extrapolated microevolution, and I don't think that's the case. I think that there's good reason to think that mutating DNA alone is not the tool for the job to accomplish radically new innovations in body type. And so I think it's simply false to say that macroevolution is just extrapolated microevolution.
JT, is evolution true?
Yeah, in as much as I don't find the distinction between macro and micro very troubling. But again, I'm not a working scientist, so conceptually, I think it's fairly safe to say that microevolutionary changes are they're testable, they're observable, and as Jonathan said, you can't extrapolate from microevolutionary changes, variations, adaptations, to this broad narrative of the entire history of life, which is what macroevolutionary theory is trying to explain. So yeah, I mean,
I was going to say, why not?
Because then you're making a huge inductive leap from the type of evidences that we can observe, that we can test, to a theoretical extrapolation that is simply untestable and unobservable.
Jonathan, would you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, definitely, I would agree with that.
Okay, well, Jonathan, since it says you're a proponent of ID or intelligent design, why don't you, once again, I hear many people on the television, on news channels, on science channels, explain intelligent design, and it doesn't come across the way I read it sometimes. So just to make sure we're clear on this, why don't you explain what we mean, or what you mean when you say intelligent design?
Well, intelligent design really is the idea that there are certain patterns in nature which are better explained by an intelligent cause rather than an unguided, mindless mechanism of chance and necessity. And so it's the idea that we look at, we know from our experience, our uniform repeated experience, which is the basis of all scientific reasoning about the past, that information uniformly traces its source back to an intelligent cause. So basically, it's predicated upon the abductive method of scientific inquiry, which was pioneered by the famed 19th century geologist Charles Lyell in his Principles of Geology, which was subtitled "Being the Attempt to Understand Changes in the Earth's Surface with Reference to Causes Now in Operation." And Charles Lyell basically insisted that if you want to explain events that happened in the remote past, one should let one's present experience of cause and effect guide that search for the best explanation. So, for example, if we find volcanic ash on an island, we favor the volcanic eruption hypothesis over the earthquake or flood hypothesis, because in all of our experience, volcanic ash comes from volcanic eruptions. Likewise, when we're dealing with information which is intrinsic to the hereditary molecules of DNA and RNA, we know in all realms of experience of cause and effect that information uniformly traces its source back to an intelligent cause. There's a habitual connection, association between information and conscious activity. So it's not an argument contrary to what is often claimed based on what we don't know, but what we do know about the cause and effect structure of the world.
Well, JT, isn't that a God of the gaps argument? We don't know, so God did it?
No, for two reasons. Number one, the intelligent designer is not necessarily a deity, but it's just a source of intelligence. And number two, there are valid ways that sciences can bar certain hypotheses. That is, we can tell that that something cannot be the case based on what we know, rather than what we simply guessing from what we don't know. So, for example, from what we know of thermodynamics, we know that you cannot possibly build a perpetual motion device, right? It's not that we don't know whether or not we could build such a thing. It's that the principles involved in transfer of energy, for example, actually debar one from ever building such a device. In the same way, you can say that what we know about biochemistry, molecular biology, genetics, and the type of information involved, we know that the Darwinian mechanisms simply are not capable of building this type of information, and the only known source is something like conscious activity.
Well, Jonathan, you talked about DNA and information. Deoxyribonucleic acid, adenine, guanine, thymine, cytosine, it's just in there. That's chemistry, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's the sequential arrangement of these nucleotide base pairs which determines how, for example, proteins fold into their three-dimensional conformation, and the three-dimensional conformation of the proteins determines the protein's job in the cells. So typically, these proteins will participate in some macromolecular machine and form one component of it. The DNA controls how the protein will fold, and so the DNA protein coding sequences are organized into triplets of 3 nucleotides. These are called codons, and each triplet or codon codes for 1 amino acid, and each codon is assigned different amino acid, and as I said, the sequential arrangement of the amino acids will determine the three-dimensional structure of the protein. So that's information, and the way I'm defining information in this sense is specified complexity. And so what do I mean by specified complexity? Well, something is complex if it's improbable, and by improbable I mean so improbable that it exhausts the probabilistic resources at one's disposal. And it's specified if it conforms to some independently given pattern. And so in all of our experience, our uniform repeated experience of cause and effect, specified complexity uniformly comes from an intelligent source. And so it's an inferential argument to the best explanation rather than an argument from ignorance based on what we don't know.
Well, then I'll ask JT this one. Is intelligent design science?
Yes.
Well, I've heard some scientists say it's a philosophy, it's a worldview foisted into science, that you presuppose an intelligent designer and then you look for evidence. That is, you reverse the normal scientific process. So in what sense could you call it a science?
Well, I think we have to recognize that there are some sciences that have more immediate metaphysical implications than others. So, for example, the study of the beginning of the universe, right, or the beginning of space-time, right, it has a much more, that's much more closely associated with metaphysical concerns, ultimate reality, than say, I don't know, botany, right? Not to offend any botanists out there, but they don't have, but botany doesn't have some sort of immediate metaphysical implication or implication for ultimate reality, right? So given the dominance of a naturalistic view of the world among scientists, that is, among scientists, their view of ultimate reality is that everything typically reduces to matter, energy in space-time, right?
So that sounds like what Thomas Nagel was saying as far as the limitations of the theory.
Yeah, so so Thomas Nagel is one of these atheists who agrees that he talks about having this sort of common sense incredulity toward neo-Darwinism, and so I think what intelligent design, the intelligent design movement paradigm has done in the last, say, 20 or 30 years, has brought that incredulity into sharper focus by questioning significant, sometimes unreflectively adopted portions of the neo-Darwinian paradigm. So anyway, I think I lost track.
I'll slide back.
IPS science, yeah.
Yeah. I'll go to Jonathan on this. You're in science, Jonathan. Is intelligent design science, or is it philosophy?
Yes, it most certainly is science. It is based on the standard principles of scientific reasoning, and so one would have to propose a reason why intelligent design doesn't qualify as science. Some people might say that intelligent design isn't science because it invokes unobservable entities, but many fields in science invoke unobservable entities, including quantum physics, for example. There are objections such as intelligent design isn't science because it is not falsifiable. In fact, I would argue that intelligent design is falsifiable because intelligent design is based on two critical premises. One, that life is chock full of specified complexity and information. And the second premise is that information is best explained by an intelligent cause. If you could demonstrate that life doesn't in fact contain specified complexity, and in fact it's quite well within the probabilistic resources at one's disposal, and that would refute the intelligent design hypothesis. Or if you could demonstrate that some mechanism other than intelligent design could explain specified complexity, then that again would destroy the design inference. So intelligent design is falsifiable. And I would also argue that intelligent design makes testable predictions, which is one thing which scientific theories do, is they make testable predictions about future discoveries, and by going out and testing those predictions, you can confirm and corroborate the theory in question. And so in the case of intelligent design, it makes various predictions. I'll just give you one. It predicts that when we look at living systems, we'll see these patterns which are habitually associated with intelligent causality, including these macromolecular machines and the sheer rarity of stable and functional protein folds within combinatorial sequence space. So if you take an amino acid residue, remember amino acids are the subunits of proteins, and you have an amino acid chain of 150 amino acids, there are 20 to the 150th power of possible ways of arranging those amino acids. And so one question that we can ask and that we can test empirically is the question, well, out of all these possibilities, how many are functional and how many are gibberish? Intelligent design and the neo-Darwinian model both make a competing prediction. Intelligent design predicts that the ratio of functional to non-functional sequences should be astronomically small, whereas the neo-Darwinian scenario predicts that there should be a relative abundance of stable and functional protein folds within combinatorial space. And when we actually look at the literature, and we actually conduct the experiments and conduct the empirical research, what we find is that the prevalence is astronomically small, which accords well with the prediction made by intelligent design. So I don't see any reason to think intelligent design isn't scientific.
All right, well, this has been an interesting discussion, ladies and gentlemen. You're here on the 5th day of the Trinity Channel's Apologetics Marathon. We're going to take a break here in just a moment. I do encourage you to call the number at the bottom of the screen to ask questions of these two gentlemen. And you can call to ask questions of them, or if you feel led, you can call to contribute to keep this network on the air. This network, Trinity Channel, is going to be expanding on the Hotbird satellite soon into Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. And those sorts of expansions, as wonderful as they are, also cost money. So consider contributing to this network. We'll be back in just a minute.
ABN and Trinity Channel launching to Europe and the Middle East on Hotbird satellite. You can watch us on the frequency 12111 vertical. For more information, please call us at 248-416-1300. In France, please dial 977-199-168. In the United Kingdom, please dial 122-829-2332 or visit us at trinitychannel.com or abnsat.com for more details.
Coming soon, the 4th International Apologetics Week, September 21st to the 25th. We'll broadcast it through internet, satellites, and through antenna network televisions. 3 shows per day. Over 40 world-renowned apologists. Titles of the shows are The Deity of Christ, Biblical Doctrine, World Religions and Heresies, Science and Creation, Politics, Atheism, Islam, and more. 4th International Apologetics Week starts September 21st. 3 shows per day. Where? www.trinitychannel.com. Click and watch live. For more information, call the numbers at your screen. ABN is now an app. ABN is now on the iPads and the iPhones. Search for ABN Sat in the App Store. Watch all the channels: Arabic, English, Worship Channel, Surith Channel, Kurdish, and Al-Qudus Channel. For more information, call us at 248-416-1300. Visit our websites at abnsat.com or trinitychannel.com.
Amen. Hallelujah. This has been a great show. I'm glad you guys are tuning in. I hope you're learning. I hope you're preparing yourselves to be able to give a thorough answer for the hope that lies within yourself. And I hope it improves and it increases the reverence that you have for Christ inside your heart, as we're commanded in 1 Peter 3:15. Also remember that Romans 10 tells us how beautiful are the feet of those who preach the good news. Yes, how beautiful are those feet, but do we need to necessarily, and can we necessarily, literally send physical feet into certain areas to preach the good news? In some cases we can, but what if we can take the technology that many of us that you're watching me at this moment with, and use that technology, these computers, these iPhones, satellites, all types of technology that we have, and use it for the glory of God, and use it for the preaching of the good news, and use it for apologetics and for discipleship of new believers. Because there are new believers, people leaving Islam and confessing Jesus as their Lord. Now, in order to do this, there's going to be a lot of work that needs to be done behind the scenes, away from this camera. You see this picture here? You have a satellite. You have other satellite dishes. And you have this huge area across the Middle East, across North Africa, and Europe, where the good news is going to be broadcast soon on the Hotbird channel, Hotbird satellite, August 15th. Now, this is all set up, it's ready to go. But we're doing this stepping out in faith, believing that the Lord will make it happen, will make it smooth. How can you be of service? How can you help? You can pray, number one, and you can ask the Lord to bless this ministry, to increase this ministry. And you can ask the Lord, Lord, what would you want me to do to be a part of the good news, spreading of the good news? How can your feet be beautiful also in the sight of the Lord? You can give, you can offer donation. Go to www.abnsat.com, www.thetrinitychannel.com. Those are two means through the internet that you can get in contact with ABN Trinity Channel. You can see the schedule. You can see programs that have been recorded in the past. You can see live broadcasts. You can download the application that you can use on your iPhone to watch the Trinity Channel any time of the day, 24 hours a day, and you can make a donation. So think about that, pray about that, and God continue to richly bless you. And we're going to turn it back over in a moment to our brother Don Deal, who's going to continue to educate us.
Hi, welcome back to the 5th day of the Trinity Channel's International Apologetics Marathon. As CL said, I am Don Deal. I'm the Director of Research and Development for Norm Geisler International Ministries. If you want to know more about that, you can go to www.ngim.org. We're discussing tonight evolution, myth or reality. We have with us Dr. J.T. Bridges from Southern Evangelical Seminary, a philosopher of science. And we have with us Jonathan McLatchie, who's getting his Ph.D. in cell biology. We've been picking on Jonathan for a little while. I think it's time we picked on the philosopher for a little while. JT, Thomas Aquinas lived almost 800 years ago, long before science came along. Lawrence Krauss and Stephen Hawking have both said philosophy is dead, science is where the action is. What does philosophy have to do with science?
Well, I think if we think about science as a way of inquiring into the world, and we have to remember that scientists, as they study different facets of natural phenomena, they're humans, right? So science is a very human phenomenon. It's an aspect of human knowing. Now it uses different methodologies to right. So an atomic physicist is not going to use the same methodological constraints as a cell biologist would, right? And so, but as the scientist, as these humans are using their methodologies to inquire about the world, the product of that is and the entire process goes off in the context of human knowing and human inquiry and belief formation. Well, philosophy, specifically epistemology, is an area of philosophy that studies human knowing as such. It studies belief formation. It studies the nature of human rationality, whether beliefs are rational or justified or warranted or something like that. And so philosophy of science, at least one strand of the philosophy of science, is interested in what we might call an epistemology of science. That is, when scientists discover, when scientists inquire about things, how is it that they come to believe the things that they believe? And so there's a whole history of the philosophy of science that's grown up over the last, say, 140 years or so. And I think it has a lot to do with studying, for example, scientific revolutions. What are the things that are in place that cause a scientific paradigm to be overthrown in favor of another paradigm? That's not a question for the scientist. That's a question for the philosopher of science. Right?
That's not a sociological question?
There's an offshoot. It's fairly recent of social scientific knowledge, and so there's a facet of the sociology of science. They study particularly sociological interactions among scientific communities. So there's that branch of another humanity, not philosophy, but sociology, as it studies scientific communities. But all of this bears in mind that scientists are humans, right? If there are arrogant and dishonest humans, there are arrogant and dishonest scientists, right? If there are honest, hardworking humans, there are also honest, hardworking scientists. And so the philosophy of science and sociology of science, it keeps that in mind as it studies the way scientists go about their tasks.
Jonathan, does it rankle you that these philosophers are looking over your shoulder and judging what you're doing and deciding whether you're able to tell the truth or not?
No, as a matter of fact, I think that every undergraduate student in the natural sciences should be made to take philosophy of science classes, because I think it is extremely important that scientists have an understanding of the philosophy and history of science. Understanding the scientific method, understanding the problem of demarcation, what counts as science, what's not science. These sorts of questions are all determined by philosophy. Understanding how we develop, how scientific paradigms change. Thomas Kuhn wrote a famous book called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, in which he talks about what results in a change in paradigm over time within the scientific community. And I think it's important that the scientists understand these things.
All right, I'll continue my role as the devil's advocate, which you should always have one of those on a Christian broadcasting channel. JT, what does a dead white European guy have to tell us about modern science, particularly Thomas Aquinas?
I was going to say, which one? I mean, the history of Western
there's plenty. I
philosophy is
recognize
littered.
there's probably billions of dead white European guys over decades or centuries, but particularly since your PhD dissertation says it's grounded in Thomistic realism, what does Thomas Aquinas bring to the table?
Well, as I said previously, one of the things that bothered me in graduate school is I took a class on Thomas Aquinas by a fairly well-known Thomist, Eleanor Stump, and as a naive graduate student, I asked her what Aquinas' philosophy of science was, because this was an emerging interest for me, and she reminded me, well, he doesn't have one. He's writing in the 13th century, so. That stuck with me, and I was a little bit concerned as to how or whether Aquinas' epistemological realism, his particular brand of epistemology, could be made consistent with 20th and 21st century philosophy of science. And so what I attempted to do early on in my dissertation was to show that indeed Aquinas' epistemology, his particular theory of knowledge, could be made consistent with an understanding of some of the natural sciences and some of the most well-defended aspects of scientific realism for philosophers of science. And so that gave me what I thought was a fairly objective platform to defend the type of eclectic realism espoused by, for example, Christian philosopher J.P. Moreland and Oxford philosopher of science W.H. Newton Smith, but from a particularly Thomistic perspective. So.
Okay, well, that leads to the question, since you're discussing realism, is the theory of evolution, would that be subsumed under the category of realism? Does it describe reality?
I would say no, and this is fairly commonsensical. I mean, like I said earlier, Thomas Nagel that you mentioned, he says that he has this sort of common sense incredulity about macroevolutionary theory, that Darwinism just explains all of the history of life. And so what I wanted to do was put a finer point on his incredulity and make it somewhat philosophically warranted. And so one of the ways to do that is to show that from the philosophy of science, when we're dealing with categories of realism and anti-realism, a realistic view of a particular theory would be a view that the theory literally explains reality. Basically, that what the theory tells us about reality is, in fact, a good description of the real. So, for example, a realist view of
something like optics or something of that sort, then.
Yeah. So a realist view of atomic physics would say that when we talk about electrons or protons and neutrons, these things literally exist at the subatomic level, and they exist pretty much as they're described mathematically in their interactions by atomic physicists, right? So when you're asking the question, is neo-Darwinian theory the type of theory that could be true? I don't think it's even the type of theory that could be true. I don't think a theory that tries to reconstruct natural history has enough data to tell a narrative, a continuous narrative that could, by anyone's standards, be literally true. I was just reading some sections of Jerry Cohen's book, Why Evolution is True, and Cohen admits that our fossil evidence for the history of life ranges somewhere between a fraction of a percent and 1% of all species that have ever existed. And so the question becomes, okay, if 99% of the relevant data set is missing, how could a theory dealing with that data set purport to give us a literally true story of the type of organisms that have lived in the past and their potential genealogical relationships? I know much has been done with genetics, but in terms of a direct evidence of what existed in the past, the fossil record is pretty much what that is.
So you're saying it's an anti-realist theory then, and could you explain what that means?
Okay, well, yeah. So within the philosophy of science, there's a range of realist and anti-realist commitments. An anti-realist is somebody who doesn't think, for whatever reason, that a theory gives us a literally true account of reality. One particular anti-realist that I think his theory explains neo-Darwinism well is Bos van Frossen. Bos van Frossen has a position called constructive empiricism, where his particular brand of anti-realism says that the way in which the elements of a theory are oriented to one another largely arises not from the data set, but in the mind of the scientist. And so while I don't think that is true across the board regarding scientific theories, which is why I espouse this sort of eclecticism. And what I mean by the eclecticism is that J.P. Moreland and W.H. Newton Smith have said that we need not be, because the natural sciences range over objects like positrons, and they range over objects like the universe and cell biology and botany and zoology, right? We need not be realists or anti-realists wholesale, but according to different theories, we could be, for example, a realist regarding atomic physics and an anti-realist regarding evolutionary biology or macroevolutionary theory.
Well,
and that was the position that I adopted. What I said was that Bos van Frossen's constructive empiricism, although it does not apply to science in general, it does seem to explain specifically the type of theory that neo-Darwinism is, and it also explains other things like why neo-Darwinism is able to resist anomalous data. But in the current evolution intelligent design controversy, most of both the proponents and the detractors from evolutionary theory are arguing about the theory as if it were solely considered along realist lines. And from the perspective of the philosophy of science, I just wanted to marshal a type of inquiry that says, well, if the nature of the theory itself is constructivist in nature rather than realist, a type of anti-realist construct, then that dictates a type of strategy in attacking the theory that has to go beyond merely marshalling anomalous data. Because by marshalling anomalous data is how one would overthrow a realist theory, overthrow a theory that actually tells us something that's literally true about the world, if that makes any sense.
In a sense, Jonathan.
I know it's a lot, but
no, that's why you're on here. We want to take this a little bit deeper in some areas and keep it broad enough in other areas so that people can follow along and challenge the deeper thinkers and the more knowledgeable, and at the same time help to raise the education level of the people who haven't studied as much. Jonathan, can the theory of evolution be disproved?
Yes, I think that it can be demonstrated that it's not causally adequate to explain the complexity and diversity of life on Earth. I think there are many examples where evolutionary theory just doesn't explain what needs to be accounted for. One example would be the preponderance of irreducibly complex structures, macromolecular machines within living systems. Charles Darwin, in The Origin of Species, proposed one possible means by which you could falsify his theory. He said if it could be demonstrated that any complex system existed which could not be explained by numerous slight successive variations, then my theory, he says, would absolutely break down. And it's the claim of the intelligent design community that there are such systems in biology. Michael Behe in 1996 wrote a very well-known book called Darwin's Black Box, in which he proposed to take on this challenge of falsification that was made by Charles Darwin in 1859 when he published The Origin of Species. And he proposed several systems which he argues to be irreducibly complex, and these arguments have been these arguments have been refined and nuanced subsequent to that. One of the most famous examples is the bacterial flagellar motor. Now there are many bacteria. Many bacteria have these propeller-like structures, which are actually comprised of a few dozen different subcomponents, and different bacteria have different flagellar systems. But the important point is that when you look at these systems, there was an irreducibly complex core of subcomponents, and if you remove one subcomponent, then the overall function of the system ceases to exist. And so the question that raises for neo-Darwinism is, how would you build one of these irreducibly complex systems which require multiple cooperating subcomponents in order to fulfill a function? And it seems to me that challenge has been met in abundance. There are many such systems in biology. So that's one way you could falsify intelligent design. There are plenty of other ways you could falsify intelligent design. Darwinism, even, not intelligent design. There are plenty of ways in which you could falsify Darwinism as well, such as if you could demonstrate that the DNA alone is not responsible for the morphogenesis of organismal form. If there are other sources of information within living organisms which are contributing to the morphogenesis of organismal form, then that suggests that mutating DNA alone is not the right tool for the job. And you can mutate DNA till the cows come home without respect to number of trials or probabilistic resources and so forth, and you're never going to get the sort of variation you need to account for a new fundamentally type of organism.
Now, irreducible complexity, isn't that a kind of an argument from ignorance, that you're saying that they don't know how it happened, therefore they should accept your explanation? How is that not an argument from ignorance?
Well, we know from experience that irreducibly complex machines are the product of intelligence. And so when we find these systems, we know that the current naturalistic explanations, materialistic explanations, don't work to account for these systems. And so, but we know of one explanation, one non-material explanation, and that is intelligent design. And it does account for irreducibly complex systems because intelligent agents have the ability to produce systems which require foresight to produce. For example, if you take the morphogenesis of a butterfly from a caterpillar, right? The caterpillar has to go into a chrysalis stage in order to emerge later as a butterfly. But you have to degrade the organs and tissues of the caterpillar in order for it to, inside the chrysalis, in order for it to eventually emerge as a butterfly. And you need some sort of foresight because you need two body plans. You need to destroy one body plan and then start again and build your second body plan. That requires foresight, that requires engineering, and that's the type of effect which we know can be associated with intelligence, and no other material explanation is causally sufficient to account for.
So you're saying it's an argument from analogy, not an argument from ignorance.
That's correct. So it's making a positive argument, so whatever else might be wrong with the argument, it's certainly not wrong because it's an argument from ignorance. JT,
would you agree with that analysis?
Yeah, well, I don't disagree that that there are explanatory limitations to neo-Darwinism, and there are anomalies that they can't explain. What I guess my point is that proving that Darwinism is false actually raises. I mean, it's a bit of a high epistemic bar. That is, proving something is false is a much more difficult task than showing that that it's empirically inadequate. And so I don't disagree with the anomalies that the intelligent design proponents have raised against neo-Darwinism. I just simply render them in a different way. And one of the things regarding the positive evidence for intelligent design, one of the things to keep in mind is that although intelligent design is tested and it goes off in the context of biochemistry and molecular biology, it's really at its core, it's a science of information, and so it's a mathematical science. And so, in as much as statistics and probability and mathematical information are sciences, it's just those sciences brought to bear in an interesting way in the context of biological information.
Jonathan, what is information when we talk about DNA and cells and such?
What is information? Well, I define information. I mean, there's different ways in which mathematicians define the word information. People often define it in the way that it was defined by Claude Shannon, who's a famous mathematician in the last century. And he basically would define information as correlating with the reduction of uncertainty. And so basically you can think about it as the level of sheer complexity increases, so the level of information increases. We would argue that the information in DNA is information in the Shannon sense, but it's also more than information in the Shannon sense. So it conveys a semiotic dimension, if you will, that it conveys meaning, it's functionally specific. So the sequential arrangement of the DNA base pairs, nucleotide base pairs, is of functional significance and is demonstrably, empirically, it can be empirically demonstrated that the prevalence of functional sequences in the vast array of combinatorial possibilities is astronomically small. And so that's how we define information, as specified complexity.
Has the project ENCODE, has that in any way strengthened or weakened the arguments of the intelligent design community?
Well, ENCODE, the first set of ENCODE papers were released in 2007, and there was another batch released a couple of years ago, and the ENCODE project basically has looked at the non-coding sequences of the genome to try and work out what this preponderance of sequences are doing. It's been known for some time that the the percentage of our genome which actually codes for proteins is approximately 1.5%, so very, very small. And it was once thought that the vast majority of the rest was junk that had accumulated over the eons of evolutionary history. And this has actually been argued by several defenders of neo-Darwinian evolutionary theory, such as Francis Collins and Ken Miller and Richard Dawkins and Jerry Coyne. They've used this so-called junk DNA argument as evidence that we are the result of a fundamentally mindless mechanism, whereas there has been an avalanche, a flood of papers in the last several years that have empirically discerned many, many cases of functionality for these non-coding sequences. And the ENCODE project is one example of a project which is shown as that the most recent ENCODE results were that the genome seems to be alive with chemical activity. So transcription of DNA into messenger RNA, of transcription factor association with DNA, of chromatin modification, and so forth. And they calculated in their when they published their last batch of papers that about approximately at least 80% of the genome was chemically active. Now, whether that corresponds to function in the way that the word is normally used, it's unclear. I mean, we certainly don't know the function of the vast majority. We don't yet know the function of the majority of the genome, but we are getting it. There's a trend where we have an increase in our understanding of how the genome works, and it's becoming more and more clear that much of the genome that doesn't code for proteins is functional as regulatory sequences, etc., and can even serve as structural rules.
I don't mean to cut you off, but we need to take a break here. But it sounds like
sure.
What you're saying is the Jerry Coyne and such, that their junk DNA arguments is an argument from ignorance, and that the Project ENCODE is showing that it's being overturned by new analysis and new studies. Would you agree with that?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. That's a good short answer for the break. Ladies and gentlemen, we're discussing evolution, myth or reality, with Dr. J.T. Bridges of Southern Evangelical Seminary and Jonathan McLatchie, a PhD student in cell biology. Here at the Trinity Channel, today's the 5th day of the International Apologetics Marathon. We'll be back in just a minute.
Coming soon, the 4th International Apologetics Week, September 21st to the 25th. We'll broadcast it through internet, satellites, and through antenna network televisions. 3 shows per day. Over 40 world-renowned apologists. Titles of the shows are The Deity of Christ, Biblical Doctrine, World Religions and Heresies, Science and Creation, Politics, Atheism, Islam, and more. 4th International Apologetics Week starts September 21st. 3 shows per day. Where? www.trinitychannel.com. Click and watch live. For more information, call the numbers at your screen.
Go into all the world and proclaim the gospel to the whole creation. Here at ABN, we strive to fulfill this commandment of spreading the gospel to all nations. Now you can watch the Trinity Channel, ABN Arabic, the Prayer Channel, ABN Surith, Al-Qudus, Kurds for Christ, and ABN Worship. We are very excited for ABN and Trinity Channel for the new coverage to Europe and the Middle East through the Hotbird satellite. Please pray for and support this ministry to continue to spread the gospel. For more information, call us at 248-416-1300 or visit us at thetrinitychannel.com or abnsat.com for more details. May God richly bless you.
ABN is now an app. ABN is now on the iPads and the iPhones. Search for ABN Sat in the App Store. Watch all the channels: Arabic, English, Worship Channel, Surith Channel, Kurdish, and Al-Qudus Channel. For more information, call us at 248-416-1300. Visit our websites at abnsat.com or trinitychannel.com.
Good afternoon. Thank you. In Jesus' name, amen. Praise the Lord. And you have been watching the Aramaic Broadcasting Network, the Trinity Channel, and you've been watching a very great show explaining all types of details about the relation and the truthfulness of evolution. Is it really true? Is it something that you can put your hope into? Not that that people think of themselves as putting hope into a scientific theory, but if you take your focus and your heart off of Christ and you deny Christ and you believe that this other ideology, whatever ideology it may be, is the truth, then you are going astray. Let's just say that. But this broadcast that you're watching is being brought to you by, first of all, the Lord and the generous offerings and gifts of many Christians out there. And we bless the name of the Lord in this. And we continue to ask you to pray and to lift up this ministry in prayer. There are plenty of things that we actually need. And I wanted to show you one of the items. This item right here is called a TriCaster. Very fancy, very technical looking. I wouldn't know how to use it. But luckily, we have guys here who know how to use stuff like this. But we have to actually get it to use it and to put it to use for the blessing of the Lord and the glorification of his name and the spreading of his gospel. And to be able to get something like this, you can't go to the dollar store and get this. You can't go to Sears and get this. This is something that's very expensive. It's a very serious media equipment. And we need your help in being able to obtain things like this and other things that the ministry needs in order to spread the good news across the world. As coming up August 15th on the Hot Bird satellite, we're going to be broadcasting across the Middle East, North Africa, Europe. How beautiful are the feet of those who preach the good news. So continue to pray about this and lift the Lord up regarding this, and we hope to hear from you soon. God bless you. And now we're going to turn it back over to our show and to Don Deal. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Don Deal, as the CL just said. Welcome back to Evolution, Myth or Reality. We have with us Dr. J.T. Bridges and Jonathan McLatchie. We've been discussing intelligent design, whether it's science, whether it's philosophy, how does it fit into the philosophy of science, etc. I think it's time for responding to some rebuttals, because I don't want the people who are proponents of a materialistic evolutionary theory to think that I'm giving you guys an easy slide because, you know, we're buddies or something. So, Jonathan, intelligent design has been described as creationism in a cheap tuxedo. Are you wearing a cheap tuxedo?
Well, intelligent design, I think, is very different from creationism. Creationism is the attempt to interpret the world based upon a particular understanding of a religious text, normally the early chapters of Genesis. Intelligent design, by contrast, is an attempt to understand the world using standard scientific principles, and it doesn't require, I mean, there are many intelligent design proponents who are not religious, there are many intelligent design proponents who are not Christians, and so intelligent design really is a big tent community which is accommodating to people who of all faiths and none. Intelligent design attempts to understand these patterns in nature as better explained by an intelligent cause rather than an unguided process. So there are creationists who are intelligent design proponents. In fact, you can't really be a creationist without also affirming intelligent design, at least in some sense, but not all intelligent design proponents are creationists. And so I think there's a fundamental distinction there.
So you're saying on the Venn diagram they're not coextensive, the intelligent design
Right.
and creationism. I think most people would agree with that. JT, is intelligent design an attempt to replace the materialistic meta-narrative of the theory of evolution with a more baby-friendly version?
Sorry, say that again, Don.
Is the intelligent design movement an attempt to replace the meta-narrative of materialist causes, the interconnected nexus of material causes within the universe, with a more, as I called it, baby-friendly, a more personal view? Is it trying to say that we are persons because persons are behind us?
Yeah, well, I think we have to make a distinction between intelligent design as it exists as a science, a scientific research program, if you will, and intelligent design as a movement in the culture, right? Just as neo-Darwinism, although it functions as a theory within the halls of biology departments at universities, it takes on a cultural inertia as well. And so it would be it would be false to say that intelligent design doesn't also have a certain cultural inertia as well. And so at the level of a cultural movement, there very much is a sort of a atheistic neo-Darwinist versus Christian intelligent design dichotomy within the culture. Although, as Jonathan pointed out, those who find intelligent design science persuasive are not always persons of faith, and those who are neo-Darwinists can also be persons of faith. But in terms of the way in which the cultural movements that are spun out of these different scientific programs, I think very much there's a materialism versus theism butting of heads in the culture.
All right, I'm going to read a quote from a supporter of the materialist view of evolution, and I'd like to get your reaction to this. It says, I'll read it exactly word for word, "Creationism's latest embodiment is intelligent design, ID, a conjecture that certain features of the natural world are so intricate and so perfectly tuned for life that they could have only been designed by a supreme being." What's wrong with that, Jonathan?
Well, first of all, intelligent design doesn't necessarily postulate a supreme being. It just really infers that there is some intelligence which is responsible for the complexity of life. Now, intelligent design in its purest sense really doesn't say much about the identity and nature of the designing intelligence. Now, as a Christian theist, I happen to think that the designer is the God of the Bible. But that's not a conclusion I came to as a result of my intelligent design research. That's a conclusion I came to on independent grounds. And so I just think it's simply mistaken there.
JT, is adding morality to the equation, does that cast the materialist biologist as the bad guys? Is that why politicians and others who support intelligent design sometimes make it into a moral question?
Well, as I said, there are philosophical implications for holding to certain views of the nature of man, right? So man is either a product of blind material forces, as most neo-Darwinists would say, or man is the product of as the Christian would hold it, as a product of a divine mind, and therefore has some purpose. And so the notion of morality gets wrapped in there, because if human nature is merely a product of chance, then there's no objective way that the human should live his life, right? And so there's no objective ground for morality or immorality. But if, clearly enough, if human nature is the product of a divine intention, divine mind, then there is objectively a way in which man should live his life and not. And so there's objectively a ground for morality and immorality. And so the atheist, materialist evolutionist does have a problem in trying to explain objective morality from the context of their, not evolutionary, but primarily materialistic world.
Well, I hear that what you just said, I've heard it many times, but I also hear it recast by the materialists as J.T. Bridges is saying atheists are not good people.
Yeah. Yes. So there's a question of human behavior. So the atheist who works hard at his job, is a good husband and father, pays his taxes, is an honest human being. This is not the question of whether materialism leads to this specific person's life of morality or immorality. That's irrelevant to the question. The question is, theoretically, can metaphysics, can a materialistic metaphysics that says ultimate reality is simply reducible to, say, physics, elementary particles in motion, right? That would mean that human thoughts and intentions are illusory, and therefore there's no responsibility for our actions, including our moral actions, and or the things that we would call morality. So it's not that materialism leads to individual atheists who do bad things. It's that materialism as a theory of ultimate reality can't justify this sense of objective morality and immorality that we tend to have.
Jonathan, do you have anything to add to that discussion?
Yeah, I completely agree with what J.T. Bridges has said. For example, to take an analogy, if you don't call a rock evil for hitting you on the head and hurting you because it's not morally responsible, it's just a rock. It doesn't have any agency or self-awareness. Whereas with a human, if a human throws the rock and hits you on the head, then they are morally evil, they are morally deficient, because they are a moral agent, and so they are morally culpable, morally responsible for their actions. And on a neo-Darwinian paradigm, we are simply reducible to rearranged pond scum dancing to the music of our DNA. We are simply matter in motion. We are the result, our conscious state is the result of firing synapses in the brain. So on that paradigm, there is no basis on which to hold anyone accountable or responsible for his or her actions.
Okay, well, I'm going to change this direction again. We switched over to the little bit more philosophical side. Let's go back towards the as much as I enjoy picking on JT, I'm going to get back to some of the standard criticisms of intelligent design, which obviously Jonathan's a proponent of. A theory must first undergo the gauntlet of peer review in a reputable scientific journal before it's widely accepted. According to the article I read, it said only one ID article has been accepted, and then it was promptly rejected after it even got into the publication, which was the Proceedings of the Biological Society of Washington. And the reason the journal rejected it, Jonathan, so they said there's no credible scientific evidence supporting ID as a testable hypothesis to explain the origin of organic diversity. Is that a valid objection?
Well, the article you're referring to was published in 2004 in a journal affiliated with the Smithsonian Institution, the Proceedings of the Biological Society of Washington, as you mentioned. The author of the paper was Stephen C. Meyer, who is the director of the Discovery Institute. The editor of the journal was Richard Sternberg, who is an evolutionary biologist with 2 PhDs, one in evolutionary genetics and one in systems biology. He has also previously worked at the Natural Institutes of Health and worked for a while at the Smithsonian Institution and Museum of Natural History. The paper was submitted to the journal he was the editor of. He thought it was an interesting paper, so he submitted it to peer review. And he was the most eligible person for that particular, the subject matter of that particular paper, and so he was involved in the peer review process. He allowed it to go through peer review, and the journal article was published in the Proceedings of the Biological Society of Washington. Then the lid came off when the neo-Darwinians saw the article, and basically the article was repudiated. The editor who allowed it to go through peer review was placed under immense pressure. He was pressured to resign. He had his keys to his office removed. He was denied access to samples. He was very harshly treated. But the article did pass peer review, and so it was published in the Proceedings of the Biological Society of Washington. The article was basically an attempt to make a case for intelligent design based upon certain features associated with an event in the history of life known as the Cambrian explosion. Since that time, there have been many papers published which are either critical of the neo-Darwinian synthesis or are supportive of alternative models, including intelligent design. And there's a list actually on the Discovery Institute website which is constantly updated, which lists out dozens of papers that support intelligent design. So when someone argues that there are no peer-reviewed scientific publications, or very, very few scientific publications which are critical of Darwinism or supportive of intelligent design, they're simply flat out false, just on the face of it.
Are there many scientists who take exception to the theory of evolution?
Yes, in fact, there's a scientific dissent from Darwinism list, which lists approximately 800 scientists all across the world with PhDs in various fields: biology, chemistry, physics, even computer science, because computer scientists are often very ready to accept the intelligent design conclusions because they understand the significance of the information necessary to produce the relevant structures that we see in biology. But there's a list of scientists who are supported or who are critical of the neo-Darwinian synthesis. The statement of the list says that we are skeptical of claims of the ability of natural selection and random genetic mutation to account for the complexity and diversity of life, and careful examination of the evidence for evolutionary theory should be encouraged. So these scientists aren't necessarily supportive of intelligent design, but they are certainly uniform in being critical of Darwinism. There are, one might say, well, that's only 800 scientists, but think about the number of scientists in the world that there are. But there's immense pressure on scientists in the academy to not be public about their intelligent design affiliations, because it can land them in trouble with their careers, and they can have difficulty getting grants and getting published and getting professorships and so forth. So there are many scientists who support intelligent design. There are many people who are public, and there are many people who are not public. And I know a lot of people who are not public about intelligent design who say that they would come out and be public about it. They would sign the scientific dissent from Darwinism list, and they would write books and articles and so forth if it wasn't going to land them in career trouble.
So you're saying there's 800 creationists who are against, who take exception to the theory of evolution?
No, and they're not necessarily creationists or even intelligent design proponents. They are simply critical of the efficacy of the neo-Darwinian paradigm.
So when they attempt to brand intelligent design people as creationists, is that a form of a genetic fallacy or some other form of fallacy, simply to paint you in a way that your motivations have tainted your science in such a way?
Yeah, it's a number of fallacies, actually. Genetic fallacy would be among them. It's also ad hominem against the man. It's an attempt to discredit by guilt by association rather than actually engaging with the arguments. Sure, maybe we are creationists. Maybe we think the Earth was created 10 years ago. But what about the evidence for design? Because it's a completely different question about the age of the Earth and what's needed to explain the complexity that we see in biology. And these are two different avenues of inquiry. I personally think that the Earth is ancient, of the order of 4.6 billion years old. There are people within the intelligent design community who think the Earth is very young, approximately 6,000 years old. That would be the young Earth creationist position. And there are young Earth creationists who do good scientific work and are very good contributors to the intelligent design community.
JT, they say that ID has the potential to drive people away from science, and it's a science stopper. You say there's a brain behind it, or an alien, or a god, and therefore you just stop at that point, and science stop. In your research on intelligent design and the theory of evolution, the battles going back and forth, has intelligent design stopped science?
Well, I mean, certainly it stopped some sort of science. It stopped neo-Darwinism from having such a hegemony over biological origins. But as I said earlier, there are some discoveries within the sciences that tell us that certain avenues are implausible. So, for example, thermodynamics tells us that you can't build a perpetual motion device. So, one of the things that intelligent design has contributed to the scientific discussion about biological origins is, for example, Michael Behe's work, both in Darwin's Black Box and The Edge of Evolution, is he's shown that basically he's shown the exact scope that natural selection can be expected to have within a type of organism, right? At certain scales, at the scale of the cellular up to full-blown mammals, right? So I would say that that intelligent design, rightly understood, is the demonstration that there has to be some sort of intelligence behind the type of information that we find at the level of molecular biology, biochemistry. Now the question is, well, then what, right? Where do we go from there? I don't know, but it certainly opens up the door to understanding that, you know, perhaps all of life is not genealogically related, right? That it definitely opens the door to new avenues of looking at the history of life, right? And new causes that might be involved in natural phenomenon.
We got about a minute and a half left here, about 2 minutes. Jonathan, if we have not all descended from Luca, the last universal common ancestor, then what's the alternative?
Well, there's not necessarily just one alternative. There's certainly evidence for at least common ancestry at a limited level. All humans, for example, clearly share a common ancestor. And the real question is, to what extent are organisms related by descent? And irrespective of the extent to which common ancestry is true, neo-Darwinism, the idea that life is explicable by this non-intelligent, mindless mechanism, is demonstrably devoid of scientific traction. These issues are often conflated. People say that, you know, we have evidence for common ancestry, therefore that must be evidence for the efficacy of the neo-Darwinian mechanism, but that's just simply not the case. You need to demonstrate both to be the case.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, you've been here tonight. We've been discussing evolution, myth, or reality, or all subtitled Doubts on Darwinism. We've had Dr. J.T. Bridges of Southern Evangelical Seminary, a philosopher of science. J.T., thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Don.
And Jonathan McLatchie, a PhD student in cell biology, has joined us as a proponent of ID. Jonathan, thank you so much for your contributions.
Thanks, Don.
Ladies and gentlemen, this has been the fifth day. This is the fifth day of the International Apologetics Marathon. This has been Evolution, Myth or Reality. We have more excellent shows coming on later tonight. Please stay around for the 8 o'clock and for the 10 o'clock shows tonight, and you'll be blessed and you'll be educated. Thank you so much. God bless and good night.
Go into all the world and proclaim the gospel to the whole creation. Here at ABN, we strive to fulfill this commandment of spreading the gospel to all nations. Now you can watch the Trinity channel, ABN Arabic, the Prayer channel, ABN Surith, Al-Qudus, Kurds for Christ, and ABN Worship. We are very excited for ABN and Trinity channel for the new coverage to Europe and the Middle East through the Hotbird satellite. Please pray for and support this ministry to continue to spread the gospel. For more information, call us at 248-416-1300 or visit us at thetrinitychannel.com or abnsat.com for more details. May God richly bless you.
Coming soon, the 4th International Apologetics Week, September 21st to the 25th. We'll broadcast it through internet, satellites, and through antenna network televisions. 3 shows per day. Over 40 world-renowned apologists. Titles of the shows are The Deity of Christ, Biblical Doctrine, World Religions and Heresies, Science and Creation, Politics, Atheism, Islam, and more. 4th International Apologetics Week starts September 21st. 3 shows per day. Where? www.trinitychannel.com. Click and watch live. For more information, call the numbers at your screen. ABN is now an app. ABN is now on the iPads and the iPhones. Search for ABN Sat in the App Store. Watch all the channels: Arabic, English, Worship Channel, Surth Channel, Kurdish, and Al Qudus Channel. For more information, call us at 248-416-1300. Visit our websites at abnsat.com or trinitychannel.com.
ABN and Trinity Channel launching to Europe and the Middle East on Hot Bird Satellite. You can watch us on the frequency 12111 vertical. For more information, please call us at 248-416-1300.